buonasera. Good evening, everybody. Okay, as we said, we are going to have this talk tonight in English. I would like to thank once more the Italian Cultural Institute for hosting us, and above all, Dottoressa Iafrate and her wonderful team for making this series of events possible. This is actual, and of course, I would like to thank our two main guests of tonight, Professor Parente, Professor Blondeau. Blondeau, yeah. And this is the fruit of a collaboration between the Institute and rIICerca, the Belgian chapter of rIICerca. Our main mission is to promote and integrate the Italian researcher here in Belgium, and to disseminate the work that is carried out here in Belgium by Italian researchers, and to, let's say, promote as much as possible the integration of the scientific culture within the international and Belgian community. That here in Brussels is particularly active. Last time we explained robotics, so it was very projected into the future, something that didn't exist up to 50 years ago, I would say. And now instead we are going back to something that has been existing since the dawn of times, the dawn of civilization, which is exploring the element of fire. So our first speaker, let me introduce Professor Alessandro Parente. He has been is a professor since 2013 in the Department of Aerothermomechanics at the Brussels Faculty of Engineering, and also Vice Dean for Transition, Societal Impact and Business Relation at Brussels Faculty of Engineering. He obtained his PhD in 2009 in Chemical and Material Engineering at the University of Pisa, and then it worked at Von Karman Institute, senior research engineer, and research associate a bit before at the Institute for Clean and Secure Energy at the University of Utah, USA. And since 2010, he's been appointed as assistant professor. His research interests are in the field of turbulence, chemistry, turbulent combustion, reduced order models, so it's well qualified today to introduce us to the mysteries of fire. He is currently chair of several units. I will not go list them all. Essentially what you see here, the Bright and the Burn Joint Research Group within the ULB and VUB, let's say joint groups. Without any further ado, let me join me in welcoming Professor Parente here on stage, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fabio, Dottoressa Iafrate, for the. I mean, I take I call Fabio because he's my friend. Thank you, Dr. Pina. Thank you, Dottoressa Iafrate. I think it's very. You gave me a very. You made a very good introduction to my talk, because you actually made reference to the history of fire, and in fact, this is my first slide. It was very nice to prepare this talk, because I had the chance to study things of combustion that I have never studied before. And combustion is, in fact, the oldest technology of mankind, and it's, in fact, at the core of many, many legends. You probably all know the legend of Prometheus, that stole the fire from the gods to give them to the humanity in the form of technology, civilization, and knowledge, but then he was punished for that and put in chains. You also know that many legends about in Greece and India refer to the existence of these eternal fires, and one of them was at the Tholos at Delphi in Greece. So a very, very old technology, and probably some of you have read this book, *Sapiens*. I mean, it's a remarkably written story of mankind. Yuval Harari mentions that humans, when the humans domesticated fire, they really gained control on what he calls an obedient and potentially limitless force. And in fact, this was what put men at the top of the food chain. And there are several phases with fire. There was first very old, a very long time ago, interaction with fire, then controlling fire, and then making fire. We can actually divide the history of fire in these three era, and they affected a lot the evolution of civilization. Now, when we look, and this was very nice, in fact, to follow this when I was preparing the talk. Fire has its roots in alchemy. This attempt of transforming metals into gold, and alchemy has the roots in the Greek in the Greek vision of the elements that constitute everything. So the four elements, and fire was, in fact, the main elements of those. I have here a citation from Heraclitus, who mentioned that all things are an interchange for fire, and fire for all things, just like goods for gold and gold for goods. So this really puts the accent on the importance that fire was playing amongst the different elements, air, earth, and fire. And I think this is, and this also shows the relevance that he was playing through the history. I've put here a short timeline showing how we went, from, in a certain point of view, from this alchemy to science. In the beginning, there was this idea. You will discover combustion is a very complex phenomenon, made of several interacting things. And this was actually visible in the first vision of this phenomenon. So this alchemist, Van Helmont, taught or formulated a theory for which when a substance was combusting, there was the release of what we was calling this spiritus sylvestre, so a wild spirit that was leaving the candle or any combustion substance. And then came what is called, what is known as phlogiston theory, that actually is based a little bit on this idea, and again, the idea that all combustible material contain this special substance, this phlogiston that is released through combustion. And this idea that is a bit, between science and alchemy, is still found in the last part of this timeline. In this, that we can already define modern scientists, because both Priestley and Wilhelm are known for the discovery of oxygen, but they still were defending this theory of the phlogiston. Okay, I think the first really witness, the first testimony of a theory on combustion comes with Faraday. I don't know if you knew this, but Faraday wrote the very well-known chemical history of the candle. It's a really beautifully written book. I actually had to read it for this talk, and I was really, it was really fascinating. It's a collection of lectures, and they actually focus on the role of oxygen from air in the combustion process, the formation of water, all the combustion products, even the role of hydrogen, which is something that we are all very familiar with nowadays. Everyone talks about hydrogen, and this is expressed in a form which is lyrical. It's beautiful. I have put it here in extract. I don't have time to go on that, but you really see that it compares shining on a flame to ruby and diamonds. And I was really excited. I asked all my students to study these 4 lectures. I don't know if they're so excited as me. Anyways, then I go to another point that was also mentioned by Dottoressa Iafrate, and the role that combustion has played in our growth as a society. So we could say, without being exaggerated or overstating this concept, that we have lived in a combustion age in the last centuries, for sure. You see here an engraving of the Industrial Revolution. At the time, this smoke coming from the chimney was considered a sign of civilization. Imagine, go figure. And this was the time where combustion was used, in fact, to produce materials like steel. This was, or it was started to be used for transportation. You see here the original drawing of Watt's engine, and you see here the first steel process making, which was really delivering high quality steel. So the Bessemer process, and so I think it's really it's really fair to say that we have lived in a combustion age for the last centuries. And even Europe, I might add, has its roots in combustion, because you probably know that after the war, it was decided to unite you see, la mise en commun de production de charbon et d'acier. So these industries of steel and coal were put together in the effort of not only sharing the resources, but also preventing from future wars. So we also, in a way, we could say that Europe has its roots in these combustion processes. But then you might wonder, then let's try to be not the alchemist here and define what combustion is. So combustion is a chemical reaction between a fuel, that is the substance that contains in itself the energy, and the oxidizer that allows this energy to be released. This oxidizer is usually oxygen, and this is actually associated with a significant release of energy. This is why it has been used so much and to that extent in the last centuries. So I actually draw a timeline, and these are 4 slides. Julien told me to remove it, and I didn't. But anyway, I just kept it to show a couple of things. So when you look at this timeline and you look at very long time ago, you see that, a few things happened, but not many. And then you see that as we go on and on, you have many, many things that happen. They become denser and denser. I also discovered that there is a Nobel Prize on combustion, and I didn't know this. I admit my ignorance here, so I didn't know. And then you see that really becomes really dense, all the discoveries and associated effect to combustion. But you see that when you approach the 2000s, you see that some of the aspects that are associated to combustion are more related to the downsides of combustion, so the negative effects. And this is particularly visible in the last events that I have highlighted here. So they are all, let's say, events that I have highlighted to point out the negative, or like the negative effects brought by combustion on the climate, but also on air quality. Okay, so this brings me to talk about this. What are these, let's say, the problems that are associated to the use of combustion processes? You probably know that in the COP21 it was decided to limit to try and limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. This is associated to a certain amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. However, when you look here at the carbon budget, so the amount of emissions that we can still afford to be able to keep this temperature increase below the 1.5 degrees, we realize that we have almost depleted this budget. And we already know that we're suffering all the consequences, because we have all proofs of the effect of climate change. And here I just wanted to point out this with this beautiful picture of the Swedish photographer Christian Aslund. So there is a website, you can go and look it up. What he did was to actually take pictures after 100 years at the same location, more or less, in the same period of the year, and you see the big impact of climate change, especially in the northern regions. When we look at this, we think, okay, where are we with using non-fossil fuel resources? Because, of course, the combustion of fossil fuels is irresponsible for that. And then probably you have used this website, or you're familiar with this Our World in Data, because everyone has looked at this website during COVID. But here I want to show you the energy use. So here what you see is the global primary energy. What is primary energy? Is the energy available in nature. So fossil fuels, you see hydropower, and so on and so forth. And so what you see here that the world is really still, I say, addicted to fossil fuels. When you look at the share of primary energy fossil fuels, from fossil fuels, so much energy is produced starting from fossil fuels. You see that there are some exceptions, but if you look at the world, we are at 80%. So 80% of the energy needs of the world are still today provided through these fossil fuels. I also want to point out something here that if you go home with this message, I would be very happy. There is a great misconception on energies. One of the main ones is energy equal electricity. Electricity is only one of the end use of energy, and it's not even the largest one. The largest end use of energy is heat. Almost 50% of the energy use is to produce heat. Heat that is needed in several processes, like casting, steel production, glass production, ceramics production. Everyone here has something on himself, herself, that is associated to a combustion process. And so this is something that we all should keep in mind. Electricity is just the tip of the iceberg. What is below is much more relevant and scaring from a certain point of view. So heat is the big elephant in the room. We could say that. And it's a big elephant in the room that poses a lot of issues, because even if you look at World Energy Outlook, so this is what is produced every year by the International Energy Agency, there is a big issues associated to electrification of process to produce heat. So while several other processes like heating of this building can be electrified easily, it's not easy to electrify the production of coal, steel, glass. Not the production of coal, the production of steel, glass, ceramics. Everything that goes under the umbrella of what we define energy-intensive industries. Or hard to abate. Have you heard of hard to abate CO2 emissions? Energy-intensive industries. These are all these industries that require high temperature heat. So heat at very high temperature that you cannot provide with an electrical equipment, or they need non-energy sources to produce chemicals. Ammonia is the main fertilizer used in agriculture. These require a lot of energy, and this energy cannot be provided otherwise than with fossil fuels today. Same methanol. Sorry, this is I don't know why this is in French. Methanol and ammoniac. The same stands for high density local energy sources, and so everything that concerns shipping, trucking, aviation. So here I was citing George Orwell. All sectors are equal, but some are more equal than others when it comes to these net zero goals. And these hard to abate sectors are really, really hard to abate. It's very challenging. I want to actually show you why this is challenging, and then I maybe give you some optimistic view on the future, and not to go home with a dark view on the future. So this is to justify why there are some processes that are difficult to electrify. You see that indeed, if you look at this plot, this shows how much industrial processes in percentage require a certain temperature. You see that there are many processes that require very high temperature, and these very high temperature are very difficult to get with electrical heating. It's impossible today. The other point, and I have a good example to show you, is the concept of energy density. So how much energy I can put in a certain volume, in fact. And okay, this is a nice graph, more scientific, but I have a better example that I show you later. Not before showing you the other problem, which is what we call the mismatch between production and consumption. You might need energy now to light up these lamps, beautiful lamps from Artemide. However, if you don't have wind and sun, you cannot use renewables. Okay, so this mismatch between production of energy through renewable energy sources and consumption is also something that prevents the use of renewable sources in certain applications. Now I want to give you an example, and I think it's a very clear example that shows the challenges here. Have you heard about this solar impulse? So it's a remarkable technology development by Solar Impulse. It's a company, and it's associated to an industry that is in Brussels. It's Solvay. What this does, so this is an airplane just powered by solar panels. You have solar panels on the entire wingspans and the body of the airplane. However, this is one passenger, 200 square meters of PV cells for a very small weight. It's 1,600 kilograms. Now you might wonder, let's do the same on a Boeing 747. Is it possible? What do you think? Let's see. Let's see if it's possible. So what kind of energy density? You see, how much power do I need per square meter in a Boeing 747? So the calculation is simple. A Boeing 747 requires 4 liters per second of jet fuel. A jet fuel has a certain energy density. It's indicated there. So it's, I'm not good with this. So it's 35 megajoule per liter. If I multiply 4 by 35, I get the total power. The surface of the wings are more or less, it's very approximated, Fabio. I'm sorry for that. It's 2,000 square meter. If I divide, this is what I need. I need 70,000 watt per square meter. What can I get with solar panels? I can get 75 watt per square meter. Okay? So it's 0.1% of what would be needed of what is provided by jet fuel. So you see here the magnitude of the issue. The big elephant in the room is 3 orders of magnitude bigger than us. Okay, and now there is the fun. I mean, the people that like Tesla will say, okay, I will put Tesla batteries and I will run my airplane. However, you will realize that the weight of these batteries will be 50 times the weight of your Boeing 747, which will never take off. Okay. So these are the issues we are with. So what are the issues? The issues is that these industries produce 30% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. They are responsible of 10% of the CO2 emissions from combustion processes, and they are very highly integrated. But the real problem is that we need them. We need steel, we need glass, we need ceramics. And so what do we do? So this is why this is really the sectors where we would say this is a headache. So one solution, there are solutions, and people are working on that. And I think Europe is actually funding a great deal of projects on that. What is a possible scheme to address this? One scheme is that I've talked about the mismatch, about the need of energy and the production of energy. This also means that there are periods of time where I have excess production from renewables. Then what I can do with this excess of production, I can actually use that excess and store it in what we call synthetic fuels. Now, these are fuels that are produced by reactions that are controlled in reactors, but now you're not using anymore a fossil fuel, but you are producing yourself the fuel by doing what? By using this energy to electrolyze water. The electrolysis of water will produce hydrogen. Then if you have nitrogen from the atmosphere, you can produce ammonia. And if you have any source of CO2, carbon dioxide, you can go on and produce your synthetic methane or synthetic methanol. This approach is interesting. Why? Because it provides a solution to the decarbonization goal that we are after. So we can decarbonize the grid because we can rely now on synthetic fuels. We don't need any more fossil fuels. And also it provides an interesting aspect, which is the flexibility of the energy system, because now we could produce, theoretically, the fuels wherever we want. We just need wind and sun and some chemical plant. So in Belgium, maybe you don't have sun, but you have wind. So that's what, just to say that you can produce hydrogen also in Belgium. And there are many projects in Antwerp in that respect. However, and here where comes the, the interesting part, once you have produced this fuel, then I would say that the ball is again in the field of combustion, because you might have whatever fuel you want. Synthetic fuels are actually not new. In the Second World War, you probably know that they were produced, for instance, by the Germans to actually fly their airplanes, because they didn't have access to fossil fuels. So Fischer and Tropsch synthesis were already known. What I mean here is that to unlock the potential of these molecules, you need combustion technologies that are able to convert these fuels without producing pollutants. Because now, if you have synthetic fuels, but you still produce pollutants, you have an issue. Okay, so what we are really after is to actually deal with what this is called, in energy, it's called the energy trilemma. So you have technology that can simultaneously accommodate the efficiency constraints, the flexibility constraint, and the pollution control. So basically, technologies that are respectful of the environment, cost-effective, and they can assure a certain security of supply. Is this easy? No, it's very complicated. It's very complicated and complex, which are two different words, but I will not explain that. Here, I show why it is complex. It's a bit technical. It's the only probably technical slide I have. But combustion is basically bringing together several phenomena. Two of them are turbulence and combustion and chemistry. Okay. Now, turbulence, you probably all know Richard Feynman, is the Nobel Prize of Physics. He said turbulence is the most important unsolved problem of classical physics. In fact, it's still unsolved. It's one of the millennium problems with $1 million dollars reward. There is still an open problem. And on top of that, so not only turbulence, but now you put on top of that chemistry, which brings with itself small scales, a lot of chemical species. A typical combustion of a fuel can be described by hundreds of chemical species. So now you see the issue here is that you have to take all this into account, and then you have to be able to put all of this together and be able to model this. Of course, I don't have time to talk about that, but this is what we do in our everyday life. Okay, so this brings me to the conclusions. Combustion has shaped our societies, I think we all can say this, but it's responsible for a large share of carbon dioxide emissions, and it's at the core of what I define, or what we know today to be the climate challenge we face. Fuels and combustion, however, will continue to play a key role. Of course, we have to understand that they are needed in specific contexts, like these hard-to-abate or energy-intensive industries that I've mentioned. And we need then new technologies that are required to convert the variety of fuels that we'll produce synthetically with no pollutant emissions, with high efficiency. I hope I have convinced you about that. If you're not yet convinced, there is another motivation not to give up on combustion if you are a fan of Stranger Things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parente. So, getting ready for the next talk. So let me introduce Professor Blondeau, Julien Blondeau, Professor at VUB, Department of Mechanical Engineering, and Head of Research Group in Thermal and Fluid Dynamics Flow. Co-head of Research Brussels Institute of Thermal Fluid System and the Bright Group also. And his research activities are focusing on clean heat and power production, with a specific focus on energy efficiency, retrofit of large coal power plants and based on biomass, hydrogen and hydrogen-derived fuels, heat networks. And just for a bit of history, he's been a design engineer from 2005 to 2008, and he got his PhD, became combustion expert up to 2015 at Laborelec. and then technology manager the following year, and then he became assistant professor at VUB, and then associate professor from 2021. So welcome here on stage, Professor Blondeau.
All right. Just a second. All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. Let me just test that it works. Of course, I agree with everything Alessandro said, but I need to give complementary information, of course, because that was only part of the story, and I would say, but as a joke, that he only talked about the easy part of combustion, but you know what I mean. You see in my title, I talk about turning trash into treasure. Actually, Alessandro said something about synthetic fuels, the future, and moving from the usual fossil fuels that we don't want to use anymore to synthetic fuels. But there are other types of fuel that are even more challenging than that. So, of course, we need to build a clean energy system with renewable energy, and that will be the opportunity to produce those synthetic fuel that will help us to store energy during the winter, for instance. But at the same time, we will also have to build a more circular economy because we need to extract less and less materials, or I would say we will extract more and more materials, but we need to be very careful with what we do, especially in terms of metals and so on, but also in terms of biogenic materials to make bioplastic, for instance, or to build a bio-based economy. If we want to get rid of fossil fuels, because we use those fossil fuels for energy, but also to make plastic, for instance. So we use them a lot as a source for chemistry and materials. So next to the clean energy system, there will be a circular economy. But nothing can be circular, perfectly circular, of course. There will be always waste and residues from that circular economy, of course. So from the excess of renewable energy, and let's hope we will have enough excess to be able to store a bit of renewable energy for the winter under the form of renewable fuels, synthetic fuels like hydrogen, and then anything you can do afterward with it. We will also have a certain amount of trash. And I say trash, but it's more like waste streams or residues from that circular economy, right? So it's quite interesting to realize in the end that this can be used as a fuel. After you have done everything you can to recycle as much as you can, there will be residues that you can valorize as in the form of energy. So it's quite funny to realize that you have quite a split between very clean synthetic chemicals that we will make from renewable energy, and on the other side, residues from the circular economy, and in the middle you should put the fossil fuels that we don't want to use anymore. So we will move from that situation where we are completely addicted to fossil fuels, gas, natural gas, oil, and coal, and we'll move to, on one side, synthetic fuels, and the other side, residues. That's a big split, but big splits are something we are used to in Belgium. We're quite good at that, to make a huge split between two complicated situations. So, as a joke, of course, this is very easy to burn. It's very clean. It comes out of the factory. No problem. You don't have dirt. You don't have ash. You don't have a lot of pollutants in that. Burning those residues, this is much more interesting. But I'm joking because actually I work on both topics and we work in a joint research group where we deal with both, of course. But I wanted to add to that, to this. Now, do we use that kind of trash from the circular economy already? Actually, yes, and in a renewable way. Today, actually, bioenergy is the current way we use some residues to produce renewable energy. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So first I will define what is bioenergy or biomass in general. Bioenergy is biomass is any fuel that is derived from recently living organism. Okay. Anything that is biodegradable, if you like. Okay. So of course wood is part of it. Wood directly coming from the forest as a residue of the forest industry, because you cannot use all parts of a tree for high added value products. Okay. So you do planks, wooden beams with the main part of the tree, then you do paper, cardboard with the rest, and then there is still a small residue. If you don't do anything with it, they burn it on the road next to the forest. So a good thing to do is to make wood pellets out of it and to produce energy from it. This is renewable and sustainable as long as you are sure that the forest is managed in a sustainable way, of course. Here it's not about deforestation and burning trees to produce energy. Okay, sometimes it's a bit of a cliche about bioenergy. Of course, you can also use residues that you will get from preparing the trees to make beams or wood planks. Okay, you get sawdust. That's a way, also something you can valorize also as energy. Bark and even wood after the consumption, wood waste actually. Also, of course, cardboard here, or even the biodegradable fraction of your municipal solid waste, your trash bag, is also considered as biomass. You can also grow some trees or some vegetables to make energy out of it, especially, again, it doesn't need to be in competition with food, on marginal lands that you cannot use to grow properly food. Then you can use specific species to make energy out of it. And of course, any residue from the agriculture is also biomass. Now I have a small question for you. Do you have a rough idea on the proportion of biomass, all those products, we use as renewable energy today? So not in general, because Alessandro said it's 80% fossil fuels. But for the 20%, well, you still have to remove nuclear, so it must be something like 15%. In those 15%, how big is biomass? Who thinks it's like lower than 25% of renewable energy? Who thinks it should be somewhere between 25 and 50% of renewable energy? Who thinks it's more than 50, which means more than all the other renewable sources of energy together? Well, you all lose. Because today in Europe, biomass is 60% of the renewable energy that we use. And in the world, it's more than 70%. Okay. I will explain you why. This is surprising, of course, and I will explain you why. Then you have hydropower producing electricity, because hydropower is cheap and clean. That has been cheap and clean for a long time, so we use it as much as we can everywhere in the world, actually. Yeah? So the potential is quite limited. And then comes wind and sun, and then geothermal and solar thermal. In the world, 70%, but this includes what we call traditional biomass, which means a very bad or not efficient use of biomass. Low efficiency, a lot of pollutants. I would more focus on Europe, where we use modern technology to use biomass. Okay, so this is a quote from the director of the International Energy Agency. Bioenergy is the overlooked giant of the renewable energy field. Will it remain like that? No, for two reasons. First, wind and sun will boom. We see that the price is going down. We use more and more electricity from wind and sun, so they will boom in the future. And biomass will not follow. First of all, because biomass is limited in terms of availability, especially if you focus on sustainable biomass. If you want sustainable biomass, the amount of biomass that you can use, those residues that I was mentioning, they are limited. It is limited. And second, in relative terms, in absolute terms, biomass will keep on increasing as well, but not as fast as wind and sun. So in relative terms, it will go down, and following the IEA, in the end, in 2050, you will have something like 20 to 25% of our needs that would be fulfilled by biomass. So I focus on biomass here for a few slides because it's the main residues that we use today to produce renewable heat and renewable energy. But it's mainly today woody biomass, meaning wood. And you might say, why do you burn wood? We could do much better with wood than burning it. First of all, we could do cardboard and planks and so on. As I said, of course, it's already taken into account. We're talking here about the residues from that industry. But people are thinking of doing bioplastics in the future. Could you use wood to do bioplastic? Well, maybe there are some processes, but it's not industrial scale yet. So today, we're talking about residues for which we have no other application. In the future, of course, you should use that resource the best possible way, which means doing bioplastic to replace fossil fuel, for instance. And then we will use the residues from that circular or bio-based economy to produce heat. So for the moment, agricultural biomass is only 20%, but it will probably grow in the future. Use more residues from agriculture and bio-waste. Anything biodegradable coming from your waste or from waste from industry and so on. So it's quite obvious that we use woody biomass today because we have nothing else to do with those residues, but in the future it will go down. So this is an explanation why everybody is surprised by the share of biomass. And it's very much related to what Alessandro already said, that misconception or that confusion between electricity and energy. Okay, we produce the green ways to produce electricity in the world in 2017 was mainly hydropower. Okay, then you see sun and wind there, but it has grown since then, and it will grow even more because the potential of hydro is limited or already exploited. Okay, the key in biomass is heat. We need a lot of heat, and there is not much alternative to fossil fuels to produce renewable heat. Only when we will have excess of green electricity, we'll be able to produce synthetic fuels. Okay? But for the moment, the only alternative is biomass. And that's why 96% of the green heat in the world is biomass. A little bit of solar, a little bit of geothermal. And the same goes with mobility, but of course electricity also will ramp up quite fast with the development of electrical vehicles. But for the moment, it's mainly biofuels. Okay? So biomass is a giant today because there is no alternative yet for green heat and green transportation, green mobility. That's the reason why. But as I said, it's expected to decrease in the future. All right. So what are the challenges of all those, the use of all those residues to produce electricity and heat? Hopefully together, but I will come to that. There are two main challenges according to me. Fuel flexibility. Okay. Why? Because the material or the fuel that you will get that will be available to produce heat and electricity in the future will decrease in quality, exactly as I said. For the moment, we burn nice wood residues to produce heat and electricity. We will do something else with that in the future. So we will end up with the residues from those processes or trash from the bioeconomy and the circular economy. Because of course, that's the waste hierarchy. You need to first to prevent the production of waste. Okay? Then if things cannot be, if you need to use some materials, then you need to reuse them as much as possible. Then you need to recycle them as much as possible. And then in the end, that recovery part is about waste to energy. Recovery means producing energy from it, burning it in the end to produce heat and electricity. And then if you have no choice, disposal. But this should be as limited as possible, of course. Okay. So this is the reason why the material that we will get, and that's a very interesting research topic, will decrease in quality, but still we will need a lot of energy. Okay. Second topic of interest for those units producing energy from waste is load flexibility, because Alessandro said it as well. Wind and sun, there is not always wind or sun. Okay. So the perfect system is when you have energy stored in chemical form, or those synthetic fuels that Alessandro mentioned, or all those residues. Okay. And generally, they are used in a CHP system or cogeneration system. CHP means combined heat and power. They produce electricity, but they also produce a little bit of heat that they can deliver to a client. Okay? So those are systems today, when we use them, they mainly produce heat, and then they inject electricity on the network while they're running. But they first look at how much heat do you need. Okay? In the future, we should be able to change that so that those resources also support electricity and wind and sun, on the electricity grid. Okay? So the load flexibility, how can you change the load as a function of the demand? How can you produce more or less electricity or heat when you need it? Okay, that's a very big challenge in that sector. Of course, next to those two big challenges, you have additional challenges, technical challenges. The feedstock availability and sustainability, of course. How much will we get of those fuels and those residues? Are they sustainable? Where do they come from? Do you need to certify that? For the moment, also a lot of discussion in Europe about the origin of biomass. That wood we burn is it deforestation or not? Where does it come from? Is it a residue from where? There are certification mechanisms in place to make sure that it's sustainable. Of course, a lot of discussion about those mechanisms. And then, if you want to transport those fuels, okay, you will have to transform them before. If you have a residue from an industry, you need to compact it, to dry it probably, because you don't want to transport water. So you need to dry it, to compact it, and so on. So these are actually ways of producing energy vectors. They might be solid, they might be liquid, they might be gaseous, but you have a waste, a residue, you need to transport it to another country, you need to find a way to make it clean and to be able to transport it at a low cost. And regulatory barriers, of course, are there because sometimes you just cannot transport some types of residues from one country to another. So we need to be ready to allow the industry to use those fuels. And of course, air pollution, Alessandro mentioned it, that's one problem even with synthetic fuels, that you still produce some pollutants. When you burn pure hydrogen, you can still have nitrogen oxides, for instance, which is a pollutant. Of course, when you burn residues from the circular economy, it's even worse, because you have many types of pollutants in it. You still have those oxides, sulfur oxides, and you have ash, for instance, that may produce fine particles that end up in the atmosphere, and that's not good. Of course, there are state-of-the-art technologies to clean the flue gas, but we need to develop them and also to make them efficient and also cost-effective for medium-scale installation, because most probably we will move from big power plants, where you can install big filters, to small power plants, local stuff, where it's more expensive to install a very efficient filters. So that's another challenge. A few conclusions then. The future of combustion is split in two parts, actually. E-fuels on one side, those very pure molecules produced from green electricity, and waste streams. In the middle, we want to get rid of fossil fuels that were extremely convenient, but we have to get rid of them. Biomass is today the main waste stream, mainly to produce heat, and that's very often very surprising. But again, there is a link with the message of Alessandro about the elephant in the room. And then the two big challenges are the fuel flexibility. We are going to get a lot of different stuff to burn, and load flexibility, because they will need to be able to support wind and sun on the network. And on the way, again, the availability, the sustainability, how do you produce efficient energy vectors, the regulatory barriers, and always the impact on the air quality, of course. That was it.
Thank you very much. So, as we had last time, we're going to have a question session and debate. So I would like to invite Professor Parente to sit here with me. Intention is, of course, to be open to the public. So I have about myself some questions, but of course the objective is to have a discussion also with the audience here. And so please speak up whenever you have something in mind. But just as a warm-up, so first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, and you save us a lot of math, because I know that it's quite Sunday. But I would start from let's say, a question from the man on the street would wonder, okay, that's all nice, but what happened practically if we stop combustion today? I don't know, like maybe...
Well, today?
Yeah, like tomorrow, no combustion, what happens?
No electricity, to start with, because, I mean, in general, the amount of electricity that is produced from renewable energy is rather limited for the moment. So in Belgium, it's like 20%, 25%. Then you still have nuclear, of course, but all the rest is based on combustion. So that's one. I would say no heat, because again, electricity is only a small part of the heat that we produce. At home, most people in Belgium burn gas, actually, and still oil. And then no mobility, neither, because there are not so many electrical vehicles for the moment, and it's all about combustion, the engines that we have today. So.
And no industry.
And no industry as well, of course. And so no products, no goods. Yeah, so pretty much nothing.
So we're pretty much stuck with that combustion. And so that's we started with the presentation on the history of what was happening back then, and that was kind of fun. And we saw that there was a lot of improvement, and of course this is increased over time. But like the next point, the next question is like, how far we can still go? So how much of improvement can we still expect? We are investing a lot in research, but I would say that the more we go on, the more marginal it is.
Yeah.
But what is your opinion on that as an expert working in the field?
So I think there are 2 points I want to make here. One is that, of course, combustion is considered consolidated technology. To some extent it is. However, what arises here is a challenge associated to the diversity of vectors that you might have in the future. Classic combustion devices are tailored to a specific fuel. Here, what the community is trying to do is to develop combustion technologies that are fuel agnostic in a way, so that are able to manage different fuels. How do we get there? We get there by understanding the chemical process, the interaction between the chemical process and the turbulence process, and understanding how we can decouple them. Like it is only by decoupling them that we can control them. A big opportunity in that, I wanted to put a slide on it, but it's good because now you asked the question. A big opportunity there is artificial intelligence. Every field now is massively investing in data analytics, data approaches, without sacrificing without giving up the physical knowledge of combustion. We should be able to incorporate these artificial intelligence tools to be able to improve our knowledge of the processes and improve the devices and make them really flexible.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I saw that there is a lot of research, for instance, on the folding of the proteins that is carried out with artificial intelligence, maybe for combustion purposes can be applied as well. Like
so one major challenge in combustion, but now I become technical, is to describe how turbines and chemistry interact with each other. For that problem, there is no solution because it entails turbulence that is an unsolved problem of physics. So but by mastering that problem, we could go in the direction of controlling really the combustion process. So I usually like to make this analogy. If you look at a fire is uncontrollable. No, it's a spontaneous phenomenon that happens because you have a fuel and oxidizer that react. The fuel surface, the flame surface of a fire is a discontinuity in space, but basically you cannot control the fire. I mean, you can to some extent, but you cannot control where the flame is, and so on and so forth. What we are trying to do now in combustion is to transform this in a chemical reactor that you can tailor to specific conditions. And this is very challenging because we don't have the whole control on how this fluid mechanics and combustion process overlap with each other.
okay, thank you. And I don't know, you have maybe some other take on how far we can go in the making it efficient?
That's the question is define efficient indeed. So because I think in terms of energy efficiency, we're almost there. I mean, even if you want to use the heat to transform it into work or electricity, we're almost at the limit. So as you said, it's marginal. But I agree indeed, flexibility in terms of fuel and also air pollution, of course. How do you reduce the amount of pollutant that you emit? It's also about controlling the combustion in a better way. So the efficiency will come from that direction, flexibility and lower air pollution.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there is any question from the audience.
I'd like to,
Please.
first of all, thanks a lot. There's so much knowledge concentrated here. I'm completely not in your field, so it's very nice as well. So thanks also to organizing. You mentioned like pollution. You talk a lot about synthetic fuels. I don't know much about that. I know the compound. My background is in biology, so I know a bit more in that sense. They're very dangerous also for the environment. So I mean, I have the impression that we are shifting from, we are pushing towards a direction where we don't know exactly like what's going to be what are the risks for the environment, which is again my field. So I wonder like if you take into account that while you are in this, let's say, transition of thinking phase. And also, you talk a lot about the biomass. So how do you, let's say, integrate this biomass so that the high demands, industry, etc. Industry is on land, so probably they can get some, I don't know, a track of the wood. But how can you use the same technology or things for like aviation, which is a big thing as well? And trucks, etc.
Maybe I'll take the first part and then I'll let you answer.
Yeah.
Concerning the fuels, it is true, for instance, if you think about ammonia, that there are concerns associated to the use of ammonia. Even now, I mean, if you think use of ammonia is in agriculture, already ammonia emissions are very regulated because it's a threat to the environment as well. At the same time, it's a molecule that is, for the very same reason that it's used a lot, it's a molecule that is already known, right? So you can smell ammonia very easily, even much at levels that are much below to the levels which are a threat. So in a way, this is a fail-safe kind of approach. You can actually understand when it becomes a problem. And there are also approaches to actually treat these ammonia emissions. So in a way, using these molecules that are already known I don't think would pose major challenges. That's what I mean. For ammonia, I think it's more the shipping sectors that is moving on that because they need to replace in their big diesel engines diesel fuel, and one of the possibilities to use ammonia with hydrogen in blends. The use of ammonia is because ammonia is easier to store. I mean, you can store it as a liquid at 9 bar, whereas hydrogen you have to go at very high pressures with 700 bars. So I think that there are concerns, but these concerns are manageable because these molecules are very well known. I didn't show that, but you can also go further because you could produce synthetic methane, synthetic methanol. Of course, if you have a CO2 source somewhere, this could be biogas, for instance. But you can go further. You can produce e-kerosene, for instance. In that case, you have a fuel that is very adapted to the already existing technologies in aviation, for instance, to an airplane. I don't know if
yeah, maybe to complement on that, you ask, do you take that into account? As engineers, actually, what we take into account are the legal emission limits, which are going down. If you look at the history of those limits and the history of emission of nitrogen oxides, for instance, it has decreased quite quickly in the last decades, even. So because NOx emissions were a problem since the 90s, something like that. So it decreased very much. So there are state-of-the-art technologies. Is the limit not too high for the moment? Yeah, of course, they are decreasing. And by the way, this is also decreasing very fast in other countries than in Europe or US. In China, for instance, also the limits are decreasing very fast. So there are technologies. And the idea now, when you look at what any manufacturer of big energy system do, they try to match the current performances with natural gas with those new fuels. So they say, we want to reach the same low level of pollutant that we are able to do now with fossil fuels. About the biomass, of course, you cannot use wood dust in an engine or in a plane, but you can use it to produce biofuels, liquid biofuels or gaseous biofuels. That's one option. For the moment, majority of those biofuels are produced from products that are in competition with food, so it's not necessarily a good idea. The next step is to use those second generation using, for instance, wood, but it's more complicated, of course. Another option is that hydrogen is not very convenient to store, to transport. Then you might at some point need some carbon into it to make other molecules. But the carbon, or you capture it from the atmosphere, but you could also get it from biomass, because in the end, that's a source of green carbon that was only recently captured from the atmosphere. So you could combine those two worlds, actually, hydrogen and the carbon from biomass to make new fuels in another form, gas or liquids. That's not a big issue, but then you have an additional step of chemistry, which means additional energy, and then you lose a little bit of the original energy.
There is no free lunch.
No.
There's another question from the back.
Yes, my name is Damiani, and I am not an expert. I have two questions, actually. One has got to do with policy targets and technology mix. If we think about the Fit for 55 targets, and if we think of what you've been illustrating today, we cannot but conclude that for several decades we will need a broad mix of different technologies and in terms of sources and in terms of vectors. So the question there is to you, what would be, in your opinion, the role of nuclear, next generation fission, and maybe later fusion in this mix between now and 55? The other question is also having to do with the technology mix. traditionally, both at national level and European level, we have been preaching technology neutrality. The public hand must not set targets in terms of what technology to push. Do you think that is still a valid line to take? Are we not paying too much of a price in terms of time to the objective if we don't make choices?
Okay.
I recently interviewed Julien on this topic.
Yeah, more or less, yeah, indeed. Well, I'm convinced that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for the energy transition, and it will be a mix. If you look at any serious scenario, IEA, even IPCC, all scenarios, they show a lot of different colors in the graphs. We will have to combine everything we can to reach the objective of being net zero. So that's a bit a pity in all discussions, of course, from the manufacturers of technology, but also in the academic world, I find. I'm sometimes a bit disappointed people just defend the technology they're working on without acknowledging that we will need all of them. That's one point. I'm convinced of that. Then you focused the end of your first question on nuclear power. Then that's a complicated discussion in the sense that nuclear has the big advantage of not emitting any CO2, but you have other disadvantages like the safety issues, but very specific problem because very low probability that something happens, but huge consequences. So how do you deal with that? Huh? And second, the waste, which is very limited, but will last for a long time. So you understand there, you can discuss about that for hours and decades, what we all have been doing in Europe anyway. So, but it doesn't emit CO2. But as engineers, my opinion is that you cannot choose between the problem of waste or the discussion on waste and safety and CO2. You cannot compare them. So in the end, it's a political choice of society. What you need to do, according to me, but that's my personal opinion, you need to be consistent. If you say climate change is the priority and emitting less CO2 is the priority, then my personal opinion is that we should suffer the disadvantages of nuclear waste and the risk for a few more decades at least, because we do not emit CO2 thanks to nuclear power. Because sometimes indeed there are some, I was a bit shocked, well, I should have been surprised, but when you listen to political debates, some people say, if we get out of nuclear, it doesn't change our CO2 emissions on the long term, which is not true, obviously, because if you replace nuclear by gas, you will emit more CO2. But sometimes they refer at the point where we go down with the CO2 so that it's the same amount of CO2 as now. So it's a lie, actually. If you replace now nuclear by something else, by fossil fuels, you will emit more CO2, at least for until the renewable will grow. So again, to summarize my answer, I believe in that everything will be a mix. And about nuclear, obviously, it doesn't emit CO2. You have other disadvantages. But if you say that CO2 is the priority, then you should suffer those disadvantages a bit longer, according to me. And then the second question
neutrality
was, yeah.
But it's not, are we really neutral with taxonomy? It's not really neutral anymore, right? With the EU taxonomy, now we are defining paths, as you say, because we are defining targets, and we are putting technologies on the good side, on the bad side, and on the what you call the
gray zone. Yeah.
Gray zone, in the gray zone where we have gas now and nuclear. I think there is, but giving up neutrality, however, can also have risks. I understand your point, and I agree to some extent. But if you look what has been decided on urban mobility, I don't know if it's the greatest idea, because you will put the competition that was on fossil fuels, now you will put it on metals,
and still doesn't account for all the emissions problem that we have. One of the biggest emissions is the heating. Is about heating our homes. Not so much about it's transportation, but not personal transportation.
So I think EV in transportation is a good idea for the urban transportation, but putting all the money on a single. Well, it's always.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in public policies, but indeed I think extremes are never good. So letting everything without making a choice is a danger. But choosing one technology, I think, is also kind of a danger. So I would, if at some point, again, it's not my field of expertise, if at some point you realize that one technology must be supported because otherwise, because we will need it and it will not be ready, then support that technology instead of banning all the others. Or maybe that's too simple of a reasoning because I'm not an expert. But so obviously, I'm not completely in favor of banning some technologies that could help, even if their share in the end in the market will be limited. That's not a problem. But who says it must be zero? That's the point I don't really understand.
Okay. So, yeah, I had one of the things that you treated, and it is not always well known, is that synthetic fuels are been known since I think 8 years or more. They already were tried during the war, as you said. And but one thing that struck me while reading several papers on other things back then, it was that none of this technology, there are many, has been proven to be CO2 neutral. So we can produce fuel, but none of them in the whole cycle of the production and consumption and storage and so on is CO2 neutral. So how do you see this? Is this a problem for the future of combustion, or maybe with hydrogen we are going to alleviate this? What is your take on that?
There was a study that was showing that to produce all the hydrogen that we need to decarbonize the industry, we have to produce twice the hydrogen. Because so what I'm trying to say is that, of course, to produce an electrolyzer today, you need energy. This energy today comes from fossil fuels. So the decarbonization industry will be associated with the huge production of CO2 in the following years. So do we have to see it as a transient until we reach the condition where all the all the energy is renewable, and then also the production of the components will be renewable? But for sure now it is not the case. And so what you are saying is completely true. At the moment, the very manufacturing of this device that should produce renewable energy is very energy intensive, is very intensive in CO2 production. And there is a huge pressure on hydrogen. The amount of hydrogen that should be produced is huge. I think there we should probably take a decision as a society which sector should benefit first from hydrogen. Because if we go for hydrogen everywhere, it will not be a good idea, and it will not serve any purpose in the end. I think really there is a specific target for hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels is this energy or hard-to-abate industries. It's clear. In other sectors you can do other things. You can electrify. There is a very nice plot from I think it's IPCC report, so the panel on the climate change, and they actually show what would be the cost of going for a renewable solution, and they show that for the different sectors, transport, buildings, and so on and so forth. And they show that for many of these sectors, going for the renewable solution is already cheaper than the fossil solution. But there is a big exception, is industry. Industry, you see that all the solutions that would entail a transition to renewable are much more costly than the current solution, which already, visually tells you that the problem is there.
But still, I would add that hydrogen, we will need it for those hard-to-abate energy consumers, but also for storage.
Yeah,
because then in the end, in the winter, you might end up with no renewable electricity, and you would have. Because some people claim you cannot use hydrogen. It's stupid to use hydrogen for things that can be electrified, because in the end, the energy efficiency is lower. That you have to produce the hydrogen, store it, and then blah blah blah. But if you don't have renewable electricity in the winter, you will have to use hydrogen, and if you have no choice, we will have to store renewable energy between from the summer to the winter. So in the end, in the winter, I believe, I don't know how it will work, it's difficult to imagine, but in the winter we will have to use hydrogen for other purposes that we could electrify, but we don't have the electricity at that moment.
I think it has been estimated at roughly 10% of the needs. This kind of
Okay.
what you're saying. So there are times of the year where this is actually needed.
And I would like to add that even battery technology is not as power dense as hydrogen or any other kind of fossil fuel or so hydrocarbon fuel.
Yeah, and with batteries you can store energy for hours or days,
Yeah.
but not even weeks or months. It's not possible. So you cannot have solar panels store all the energy that you need for the winter in batteries. That would be impossible.
So maybe a question, for you that you just touched this this point, like but even you, if you want to, of course, join to something. So what do you see combustion, let's say an arbitrary number, in 40 years? So like I guess we are all agreed that it will still be used, but where will be used and what is will still be applicable for combustion?
Yeah, I think Alessandro mentioned it several times. Industry, I believe, that at some point when all houses will be insulated with low temperature, then it will be not a good idea to use those high added value molecules to produce heat at low temperature. Then you will target the high temperature applications. I think also then maybe as a support to the renewable electricity, for instance, during the winter, combined heat and power. So you produce heat at a higher temperature and electricity for the network. So you do both at the same time. That's quite obvious to me.
Yeah.
And what is interesting though is that, for instance, some of these energy-intensive sector, like for instance metallurgy or even glass production. I mean, if you recall the news of a few months ago, we were saying, okay, if there is a shortage of gas, one of the first thing we cut is glass production. So some of these energy-intensive industry may not be so high added value. So this may shape the way we think about this industry as well. Like maybe they are not so important. They will be important, and then we will see they were important, and then therefore combustion will need to play a bigger role even there. Then
I think part of the answer is that probably when there is an emergency, we believe that producing glass is not a priority, and then we go for the comfort of people, because our daily life is still too much related to combustion. So if you don't have enough gas, you would ask the glass factory to stop so that people can heat their homes. In the future might be the other way around, because we won't. In the end, with gas you can produce very high temperature heat. You can go up to more than 1500 degrees. So in a sense, when you look at it that way, it's a bit stupid to burn gas to heat our home at 25 degrees, and even 25 is very hot for a home. So you lose a lot of what we call in engineering exergy, which means the quality of the energy. You can do much better with gas than heating up a home at 20 degrees. That's a loss. But for the moment, it's too often the case. So of course, you drop first the factory before your house.
And I don't know if there is any other question from the audience. If not, I have one last question to close, maybe for both of you. And this is just to give you the chance, maybe of going a bit deeper. But like, what is why? I mean, we're burning things for thousands of years. We saw that. We know that. It's very easy. But like, what is making it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to have a good combustion? Like, I don't know, Alessandro, you first.
Yeah, I tried to touch on this before, but basically, depending on the way turbulence and chemistry interact with each other, you may have a variety and a multitude of regimes. And so when I teach, I always say that there are two ends, two extreme of the spectrum, where it's very easy to manage, but life it's very complicated, and we always, for some reason, end up in the middle, where all the phenomena are very complex, and it's very complex to manage them. So there is maybe one point I want to point out is there is this dilemma. It's called it's really called combustion dilemma. So there is you know that probably you can imagine that efficiency will increase when you have a very high temperature process. The higher the energy, the higher the efficiency. However, the higher the temperature, also the higher the NOx emissions, nitrogen oxide. So you have in combustion an intrinsic dilemma, because you have intrinsically a physics of the problem where if you shoot for very high efficiency, you also will probably find very low nitrogen oxides emissions. Nitrogen oxides are very bad because they are responsible for aerosols. Aerosols are bad for respiratory problems. I don't know if you know this number, but it's kind of striking. 8 million people die every year because of air pollution problems. So it's a huge number. So when you see this problem, that intrinsically, if you have a very efficient combustion process, you will have probably very high pollutant emissions, you kind of understand where the challenge is. And so where my research is to actually find that way I can decouple these two things.
And you would like to add something?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the discussion on pollutants, because I mentioned traditional biomass, for instance. Indeed, people using traditional biomass in developing countries, they use it to cook mainly, or to heat up their homes, but in a very bad way. So they suffer from a lot of disease from the pollutants because they burn inside their homes and in a very inappropriate way. So the combustion is not good. So burning is easy. Everybody can do a campfire. At the Scouts, you do that. But the efficiency is very low, and actually you pollute a lot. So the key is for the engineer is to save the resource by using the energy in a very efficient way, but also emitting less pollutants.
Thank you. And so thank you very much for.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I just take the chance to thank both our speakers and Dr. Pina for moderating the encounter, everybody being here. And I take the chance to invite you to our next meeting of the series, which is going to be on April the 13th, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
And so, if you like this one, like we try to change every time, but the format is always the same, so you're more than welcome to come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much.